Hi, everybody. Welcome to Everything We Eat. And this evening, we're going to talk about Native American foodways. And our presenter is Claire Garland, who has a master's from Rutgers. She's also the director of the Sandhill Indian Historical Association, and they have a website in case you're interested in what they're all about and the work that they do. She's also co-chair of the New Jersey Historical Commission, Year of Indigenous People. And of course, this month is Native American History Month. And she is the resource person for the New Jersey American Indian Affairs. Claire has also participated with our Let's Talk About Race program. And she also participated in a discussion with our children's librarian who was reading a book called Fry Bread, which was all about fry bread. And so take it away, Claire. And by the way, I'll just let you know that as Claire is talking, I'm going to be putting pictures up. Just in general, every once in a while, I'll change the picture. And Claire, I assume these are all foods that are part of the Native American heritage. So, okay. Yeah. So let's start.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us this evening. Excuse me for my sinus coughing. In the background, you'll be seeing pictures that I took at a local food market. Some places are a food desert, they say, which is hard for us to imagine when we think of the number of items that we have just a few blocks from where we live. So tonight, I'll be talking about native foods, a little bit of history regarding our food heritage, and then I have some current events to share with you before we end. Approximately 25,000 years ago, people from Asia crossed the Bering Land Bridge to enter and inhabit the Americas and the Caribbean islands. Today, there are over 576 federally recognized tribes, some state recognized, many having different languages, cultures, and foods. These people adapted to the available food sources that were here on this continent. They had good health and good teeth, good skin, no diseases. They had no plagues, no epidemics. They survived in an enriched environment. The Europeans were amazed at the size of the people and the tallness. They remarked about their good teeth, that they had all their teeth and they had no cavities. Native people did not suffer from diabetes, heart disease, or cancer. Columbus in 1492 did not find cinnamon, cloves, spices, but he found Jamaican allspice, dried unripe berries, chili, peppers, and we know now that 60% of the food consumed worldwide originated in the New World meaning the Americas. Food spread among regions due to well-organized trade routes. And I'm sure you've heard of the Inca Road connecting North and South America. Trade routes across the Atlantic brought new people, and it also brought new plants, products. Cows and horses were shipwrecked off the coast of the Carolinas in about 1540. The Europeans also brought pigs, and with the animals came germs, viruses, diseases, and epidemics. The Jamestown settlers in 1609 landed here, but they didn't have enough food to last, so they had to trade for food and water, as most of the ships did. They pulled in and traded for things they needed. But they ran out of food. They wanted the Powhatan village to give them food, but it happened to be a drought period. So the Powhatans didn't want to trade their food for beads and cloth and different things. So the Jamestown settlers burned the village down, killed the people, and took their food. So food is pretty important. Excuse me. The settlers were in awe of the abundance of food here. There was plenty of game, seafood. They observed native people cooking stews over fires, using large soapstone pots, cooking meats, seafood, vegetables. The mollusks were high in protein, but low in calories. They had a diet of no salt, no sugar. There were 40-pound turkeys. Imagine getting that in the oven. There were ducks, geese, and swan. So that brings us to what we call the Colombian Exchange, when foods of the New World and Native American people spread throughout the Old World and around the world to Asia. And foods and seeds and items were transferred across the oceans to the New World. Europe had suffered many droughts and climate changes over the centuries. It suffered from plagues, diseases from Asian ships, soil depletion, thousands of years of planting having little fertilizer, and tenant farmers having no land. The people were short and had a life expectancy of about 40 when settlers arrived here, about 1600s. As soon as the settlers started living here in the New World, their life expectancy went up to 60 almost immediately due to foods, nutrition, better environment, adequate living conditions. So that shows you the importance right there, just in lifespan. Foods from Europe and Asia also changed the diets of Native Americans today. Animals such as sheep, goats, cattle, pigs, and of course, horses were brought here. Which brings us to one of our most important crops of the native people, maize, which we many times call corn. Rich in fiber, high in vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and used in over 4,000 products. It's the most widely consumed cereal grain and the most exported product from the United States. You don't think of it, but it's pretty important. Corn is a seed in the grass family. It's native to Central America, but grown worldwide. We think of popcorn and sweet corn and tortillas and chips and polenta and cornmeal and corn flour and corn syrup. Of course, the high fructose is in just about everything and not really good for you. Corn germ, a side product of corn milling, but it is rich in fat and used to make corn oil. Over 4,000 products have corn ingredients. Corn, typically yellow, comes in many colors: red, orange, purple, blue, white, and even black. Popcorn is high in manganese, phosphorus, magnesium, zinc, copper, and it is one of the most common whole grains in the US. It reduces heart disease and type 2 diabetes, divicular disease that causes cramps, bloating, and flatulence. Sweet corn, which is most popular with us, is high in vitamin B, niacin, B3, potassium, lowers blood pressure, folate, B9, and B5. Corn provides higher amounts of antioxidants than many other cereal grains, which protect against damage to macular degeneration and cataracts. In Europe, corn was also used to feed animals, which then provided food for people. Which brings us to two of our most popular holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas. But if we look at the record, those holidays barely resemble the festivities of 500 years ago. Native people had always given thanks to the Creator for their harvest for centuries before the Pilgrims or Europeans landed here. In fact, the Canadians celebrate their Thanksgiving, which goes back to 1578, from to honor the explorer Martin Frobisher, who journeyed to Newfoundland. The Spanish explorers crossed the Rio Grande in 1598, and they settled there, claiming that they celebrate the first Thanksgiving. And also in Virginia at the Berkeley Plantation, they claim that they had the first Thanksgiving in 1619, when 38 English settlers from London Company toasted the arrival of a ship that they were waiting. Which brings us to 1620, the English settlers, calling themselves Pilgrims, who journeyed from Amsterdam across the Atlantic and appeared in an Indian village, which they renamed Plymouth. They deliberately steered off course. They did not want to be anywhere near the English colony of Jamestown. They were escaping new taxes that had been imposed on them to pay for the French war that they didn't want to pay for. They refused to pay, and so they chose to leave. Now, another group called the Pilgrims came a little bit later and settled in Massachusetts Bay Colony, were very religious. So you have two groups of people, and many times they are lumped together and mistaken, but actually they were different. The Pilgrims had a very tough voyage. They had enough flour to last them, but not enough fresh water. Half the settlers died the first year. They finally got off the boat and moved into cellars. They found holes that the Indians had left. They found seeds that had been stored, and they decided to try to eat it. They lived on what they could for about a year, trying to stay alive. Soon, they had a visitor named Squanto, who was a Patuxet Indian who had been kidnapped years earlier, captured, lured onto a ship, became drunk. They pulled up the anchor, and the ship drifted off out into the ocean. When he came awake, he was in the middle of the ocean, had no idea where he was or where he was going. They took him to Spain, where he was sold as a slave, was eventually bought by some English monks, taken back to England, taught to speak English, and eventually returned to his village to find English people living there. He walked in and he said, "Welcome, hello." And they were shocked that someone walked up to them and spoke English. He taught them survival skills, planting season. Their seeds had died. The chief, Massasoit, brought them their corn seed, showed them how to water and fertilize, and nurse them into a harvest. So the next year, the Pilgrims celebrated their Thanksgiving, which was in late September, with the Wampanoag tribe of Massachusetts, having signed a treaty of mutual protection, and it marked the first bountiful harvest. There were 90 Wampanoag tribal members there that attended the feast, and 53 settlers. The natives were fully clothed, dressed for fall weather, not naked, as depicted in later paintings. The Wampanoag brought 5 deer and dishes of food. Thanksgiving became a national holiday in 1863 when President Abraham Lincoln declared 2 days holiday, one to mark the Battle of Gettysburg and the other to commemorate 1621 as a good way to reunite the country that had been torn apart by war. There was no turkey, cranberry, or pumpkin pie at the first Thanksgiving. More likely, they had duck, geese, swan, pigeon, and a variety of other items native to the environment: corn and beans, squash, potatoes and tomatoes, and other food dishes that the natives brought. In 1653, Adrian van der Donck surveyed the area of New York and New Jersey up the Hudson River, and he wrote in his notebook, "Good lumber for shipbuilding, pine, chestnuts, stripped bark off bark for houses." In other words, the natives had stripped the bark off to use for their houses. There were beech, linden, wild ash, maple, cedar, whitewood trees used for canoes, yew, poplar, adler, willow, thorn, sassafras, persimmon, mulberry, wild cherry, cab, oak-bearing acorns, mulberries, which were sweeter and plumper than the ones they had, plums, wild cherries, small apples, hazelnuts, black currants, gooseberries, figs, strawberries in abundance, excuse me, raspberry, artichoke, beans, wild onions, and leeks. There was shad, catfish, bass, sturgeon, and mussels. English military maps show gardens and orchards all around the area, fields of planting all over. The Navesink storage cellars were stocked with marsh elder, goosefoot, sunflower, tobacco, knotweed. I just read a book about Daniel Boone, which was written from his notes of 1750. He liked to think of himself as an Indian moving into the wilderness. They weren't supposed to be across the Appalachian Mountains, but he liked to go over there for hunting and surveying. He listed items that were available. They used plantain weeds for snake bite. He listed native medicines made from herbs and poultices, teas, remedies from peppermint, spearmint, clove, sage, toothache medicine made from rose hips, different kinds of gum used for upset stomach that aided in digestion, and also sap for wounds. The medicines were made from roots and herbs. The English had no knowledge of roots, but the native people had hemp and sumac, fleabane flowers, elderberry tea to cure colic, which I just heard an ad on TV for elderberry cough medicine. Maybe I should get some. And sap from a black walnut tree for swelling. He also listed berry bushes, grapevines, walnut trees, ash, maple, sugar trees, wild cherry, and fruit trees. There were pawpaw, mango, hickory nuts, hemlock, oak, wild rye, clover, blackberry, huckleberry, quince, grape, tomato, fiddlehead ferns, black beech plums, currants, cranberry, which are high in vitamin A, E, and K, rose hips, hawthorn plums, seeds, and mushrooms. He also mentioned deer, rabbit, fox, small game, bear, elk, and he also mentions bison. So when we think of bison or buffalo, we don't think of Kentucky, but apparently there were bison there at the time. This is 1750. In fact, there were numerous animals here in Monmouth County that I've read about in early records that no longer exist. And it was quite a wild place. 4 ounces of bison has more protein and iron than beef. It has less fat than beef, less cholesterol than 6 dozen eggs. Also, here were seeds, peanuts, pecan, walnut, cashew nuts. The natives used corn to grind into a flour and then made into breads. Corn was also made into mush, maybe something like grits. Acorns were used to make breads and dumplings. Pemmican was ground up, dried meat, dried berries, had no fat or bone marrow. They also made plum cakes from dark raisins, purple plums, hazelnuts, oil, flour, cloves, honey, and maple syrup. They had no word for waste. There was no word for garbage. The nutritional quality of native foods revolved around the vitamins, minerals, proteins, fatty acids, fibers, lipid content, composition, amino acids, iron, vitamins, water, fiber, proteins, dried matter, and minerals. Which brings us to the 3 sisters. The corn, bean, and squash were the pillars of the diet, which made a complete nutritional meal. Corn draws nitrogen from the soil, but beans replenish that. Corn stalks provide poles for the bean to grow. The leaves of the squash grow low, shading the soil, keeping the moisture in, and deterring weeds. Gardens of maize, corn, and beans, high in nitrogen for the soil, squash, pumpkins, 100 kinds of potatoes, actually 500 kinds of different potatoes, hundreds of kinds of tomatoes, hundreds of chilies, peppers, of which we just have a few here, but if you travel up and down the corridor of the Americas, you will see hundreds of different kinds of these items. They also had turnips, a corn porridge called sapan. We might call it hominy grits. And they used mounds for their planting. So they dug trenches that would capture the water, and they were able to like irrigate their fields through these trenches. The rows were like reservoirs to collect water for the gardens. Also, fishing was a major source of food. Right here in Red Bank, we have Oyster Point, which had a 30-foot midden found there. Midden was where they dumped their shells. So it was 30 feet wide and about 15 feet high, right at Oyster Point. Thousands and thousands of oysters lived in the river at the time. The settlers took the shells and spread them out on the dirt roads, trying to make the roads have more of a foundation. But fishing was a major source of food. Native villages were located near rivers and streams. They needed a dependable water supply, just as we do. They not only needed the fish, but waterfowl needed the water. They used nets made of vines, also traps and fish hooks. Seafood was in abundance here. Oysters, clams, scallops, lobster, cod, eel, shad, bass, alewife, herring, flounder, and bluefish. In fact, when Henry Hudson pulled into Sandy Hook in 1609, they pulled in to find fresh water, and I'm not sure if they found it or not. I think they did, or traded for it. But on the way back to the ship, the sailors pulled in 4 stingrays onto the boat and cooked them. So we don't think of stingrays being in Raritan Bay, but that was in the record, in the ship's records. And they were happy because they had food to eat. So, as I said, the middens were piles of shells. Also, you would find bones there from the animals that they ate: elk, deer, lynx, raccoon, woodchuck, skunk, squirrel, turtle, snake, and shark. The natives had a high supply of high fiber plants, wild nutritious foods, and also domesticated crops. They had fresh game, fiber-packed legumes, fruit, high in mineral content, vitamins, until they were forcibly removed by the government and their dietary habits changed. They did not use milk. They did not eat raw salad. Most of the foods were cooked in stews, baked, fried, boiled, or roasted. One of the other major foods was cacao, which the Spanish just couldn't acquire a taste for. Of course, they didn't sweeten it. They mixed it with chili pepper, and it was quite a bitter taste, but the natives liked it. Cacao is high in vitamin B and minerals. Moving on to reservations, the government issued spam, lard, sugar, all kinds of highly processed foods, soaked in fat and refined sugars, high in sodium, foods of the Western diet that wreaked havoc on the general native population. They suffer with obesity. Half the population has diet-related chronic illnesses, such as high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and a diet that has been devastating to their bodies and their health. As the Europeans moved and expanded, big game was overhunted, deliberately killed, as were millions of buffaloes. Waterways were polluted. Beavers were almost wiped out. Many things became extinct. Rivers were dammed. The fish were not able to move back to their grounds to spawn. And of course, the whole half of the United States, the forests were cleared from lumber, the use of lumber. Which brings us to 1800 in Red Bank. A blight went through and killed all the chestnut trees here. So these things can happen. If we take a look at the American South, we see that their foods were greatly influenced by Native American diets. Foods such as pancakes and maple syrup. The Europeans noted that the local Indians were tapping the maple trees to collect sap, which was then concentrated by boiling to make syrup. So that's how they sweetened their foods. In the Southwest, they used pear cactus leaves to make vegetables and drink. And of course, the corn tortillas and flatbreads, the fried cornbread, to make enchiladas filled with beans and meats to make tacos. The Native Americans' greatest contribution to our civilization has been the cultivation of food plants, which are now worth more than half of our agricultural wealth. I wanted to share with you an article that was in the Times last week, and it was called A New Marketplace for Native Ingredients. Let's see how much time I have. Okay. This was about tribes in the Denver area getting together to try to get their original diet back locally, and preparing foods for their people in Indian country. It's called the Takabi Indigenous Marketplace. It has 40 products from 9 producers, including maple syrup from a Minogan market in Michigan and beans from a farm in Arizona. They want to have an online business that focuses on Native American products, including the Sweetgrass Trading Company and Native Harvest. They're hoping to have one of the most comprehensive shops in the nation of its kind. They feel as though Native and Indigenous producers have been excluded from the supply chains. And if you can't buy on a national level, a lot of times you're just ignored. But many reservations still don't have access to high-speed internet because of systemic exclusion by service providers. So they are trying to approach this problem and help people get the native products that they know are better for their nutrition and their diets. They want foods that are raised by Native people, raised on their land. The goal is not mass commercialization, but to save foods, heirloom varieties of corn that they used to eat. They've contacted with Lake Superior Chippewas, and they're expanding on Facebook and Instagram, and so I thought that was an interesting entrepreneurial attempt to deal with the food desert that some people are living in. Another article last week was this person grew up in Arizona. His name is Don Guerra, and he had a love for baking. His mother liked to bake, and he liked to bake, and he really wanted to go back to the original seeds that were there thousands of years ago. It's believed that the Spanish missionaries brought grain there in the 1600s and mixed it with the native products. The effort is to get artisans to go back and using grains in a way that highlights their culture. Lots of craft bakers talk about growing local grains harvested and milled nearby where they live, not shipped all over the country to get there. He has been trying to get something called white Sonora wheat, which was believed to have been first planted by the Opata people in Mexico. He's been on a campaign to revive the grain, led by native seeds, and set up a seed bank in Tucson. They're collecting food seeds to be able to give people and teach them how to produce their own harvest as they did many years ago. His store is called Barrio Bread. It has become very popular. Has quite a business there, and all using native products. They're making packaged lines of whole grains, flour mixes, teaching people how to make their own breads now, more nutritious breads. And the last article is a new cookbook by Indigenous people, for Indigenous people. It's called The Gathering Basket. It was created to tell the stories behind Indigenous foods. And it's written by Indigenous people. It's called the I Collective, I guess, for Indigenous Collective. He said that they realized that people were barely sustaining themselves and they really needed to eat a better diet, to have rich and innovative food traditions. This is going to be an online cookbook, an online service. The recipes will be online. It will have embedded videos, and each episode will create a multimedia platform that becomes a document to expand and grow foodways. It'll be a virtual platform that can reach more people than a printed cookbook. The I Collective is what it's called, and they try to teach people how to use proper foods. They're also fighting to uphold their fishing rights and telling stories and trying to bring back their heritage and their country, their culture. They want to be seen not as victims, but empowered people. So I hope I covered some information that helps you have a picture of native food ways. And I hope it makes us all eat better. Anything white is usually not as nutritious as something with lots of color. And that's why I showed you those particular products that I happened to take right in Red Bank one day at a small market. And I thought, look at all this color, all this nutrition and vitamin right here. All we have to do is pick it up and eat it and become healthier in the process.
Does anybody have any questions for Claire? Or I'd like to make a few comments. And I wanted to ask you, so you said figs were native to North and South America? Because you mentioned figs.
I think so, yeah.
Because I know that tomatoes, and I did this when I was doing a children's program on the history of pizza. The pizza, as we know, it didn't really start until the I'm sorry, the explorers came back with tomatoes from the New World. So
Right.
yeah,
They were afraid of tomatoes. They thought
yeah.
they were poisonous for hundreds of years. And there, from what I've heard, there is no pizza as we know it in Italy. It's an American made product here.
Well, with the tomato and stuff, yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Though they did have forms of what we have now, but yeah, but the tomato part of it, that was not originally part of it at all.
No, they were afraid of tomatoes.
Yeah,
And
I
figs were probably tropical because so many of the tropical plants in the
was in North and
Caribbean
South
and
America, right?
South America and Central America.
And cranberries, of course, which is a New Jersey crop, so that obviously was here.
Right.
I wanted to say, from the viewpoint of a nutritionist, and a lot of these conferences I'm going to, that there is a big movement on a lot of tribal lands to get Indigenous peoples back to their native diet, to address the health issues that came about because they were put onto reservations with very few resources and ate all of this commodities food that was very unhealthy.
Right.
So I just wanted to say that, you can, in fact, I don't know, Barbara, if you saw the movie Gather, but the movie Gather is really interesting if you can get to watch that, because they talk about that effort. But they talk about Southwest, and they talk about the Northwest also, where the Klamath Indians are fighting the local, I don't know if it's the local government, because they mainly fish salmon, and that is their way of life, and that is their infrastructure. That's how they support their whole infrastructure. And they want to dam the river or something like, I mean, it's still existing to this day, the damming of rivers, the killing off of bison. But that's interesting, though. I did not know that bison was on the East Coast.
Oh,
I didn't know it was in Kentucky either until, unless Daniel Boone didn't know what he was talking about. I don't know.
Barbara, you had something to say?
no, I just remember I was through some of Claire's talk. I was remembering from that film. I guess it was that film that talked about and I remember one part where they were teaching the young people different, and they were tasting foods, and they were really enjoying them, and it was so great to see them being able to get back to some of their real foods.
Yeah, and there was the one elder, the woman was actually teaching younger people to go out and forage for things that were growing, and then how to cook them and things like that. So it was. I
remember one time I was on a walking tour in Lower Manhattan, and we went by a cherry street, and the guide said that this was named Cherry Street because the natives had a cherry orchard there.
Oh, wow.
And that was way downtown, where the where the American Indian Museum is now.
Right.
And I also wanted to mention, if I might, our New Jersey Historical Conference coming up on November the 12th and 13th, called We're Still Here. On Friday, the keynote speaker is a professor from Harvard University. And then there are panel discussions of all day that you can choose from, all kinds of topics. And on Saturday, the keynote speaker is a Robbie Richardson, professor at Princeton. And there again, panel discussions all day long that you can pick and choose what you'd like to listen to. So it should be 2 days of very informative information about every topic under the sun that you can, I'm sure you can find something of interest.
By the way, I want to point in the lower left-hand corner is and on the flyer is a representation of the Three Sisters plantings, which
Very nice. Yes.
I also want to sort of point out that without the Native Americans showing them what to do, I don't think the colonists or the settlers or the immigrants, whatever you want to call them, that came over, would have made it. I think
no, because they weren't used to the winter. That Massachusetts winter is different than an English winter because they get the Gulf Stream. So they had never really experienced the bitter cold that we have here in the Northeast. It's a different kind of dampness and temperature.
The
So they
crops
were
also-
not prepared for the weather. They were not prepared for winter. They landed too late to have a growing season or get anything grown or harvested.
Do they even
So
have, do they even have seeds? Do they even know what to plant is what I'm wondering.
they had seeds with them, but they died. They just
Okay.
didn't make it. And probably the wrong time of year.
Yeah. And I think-
But the Indian corn lived,
Mhm.
and that's why the next year they were able to
It was
celebrate.
similar. But I also think that even the farming and the farming processes were probably different. The way they farmed was probably different than the way they farmed in Europe. It's just amazing to me that you know, the Thanksgiving should be Thanksgiving to the Native Americans that actually kept them alive. But I also wanted to talk about elderberry, which has I mean, herbs in general. I think a lot of the herbs that we tout in these for their medicinal purposes, that we use, they probably all came originally from Native Americans as well. I'm assuming. I mean,
Yes, elderberry was listed as one of the berries that, you know, when they would go out to see if it was a place inhabitable, they would list all the things that the settlers could use and then write and tell them about what was here so that they could entice them to come.
Right.
Because there was nothing here. So enticing people to come, I mean, would be like enticing us to go to the moon
Right.
to live.
Right. And in a way, if you think about it, it probably was something like that because, you know, they didn't know. But anyway, yes, Barbara.
I've been using an elderberry syrup. It's made
Yep.
by, I get it, there's a woman that, when they have the market at
The farmer's market?
Bellworks, at Bellworks,
Oh, Bellworks. Okay.
he
Oh,
sells it, and you can also get it online. It's Ms. Paul's elderberry. It's supposed to be very good for the immune system.
Yep.
oh,
In
yeah.
fact, I stopped taking it, but I really should go back to that. But it's good. She makes her own.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's good to know. The other thing I wanted to say, and this is also because, you know, I am focused a lot because I work for a USDA program that was attached to SNAP. So I pay a lot of attention to this, but the supply chain issue is a very big deal on the reservations, or the fact that there is not a good supply chain issue. I will say that this administration, probably mostly because of, well, I don't know, because of Deb Haaland, but I'm sure that it's made a very big difference that she is, you know, the Secretary of the Interior. But the government is definitely focused on, number one, encouraging new farmers from Indigenous and minority groups, and also in improving the supply chain and distribution chain, because that was a very big issue during COVID. And it really I think it hit the reservations harder because they didn't have access to a lot of stuff also.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Right.
I'm glad to see the government is really paying attention to this. They are definitely aware of the fact that certain communities the supply chain was disrupted, period, but it was really worse in other communities. So,
Right.
anybody else have anything else?
Mm.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you all for coming, and Claire, thank you. I will be in touch.
Okay.
And I'm going to stop recording now. Where are we? Whoops. One day I'll get this down. Okay.